Are we ready to go? Yep. Well, welcome everybody to this meeting of the Lincolnshire Local Access Forum. If everybody's ready, and I think they are, and I'm assuming everybody's ready who's at home, I'll start with the apologies for absence. Do you have them, please, Rob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Ian Carrington, Councillor Richard Cleaver, Councillor James Kearns. We've also received apologies from Sheila Brooks, Sharon Hayes and John Fawns. Thank you.
Okay. And the next item is declarations of interest. If anybody wishes to declare any item, any interest in any item on the agenda now, they may do so, but remember that you can always do so later on in the meeting if necessary. Anybody there? No. And the next item is public questions. There are no members of the public present in the chamber, but which it only just occurs to me, do we have facilities for members of the public observing online?
To ask questions?
Well, either, but first of all, to observe at all. Is it possible to do that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So our meetings are streamed live online, so members of the public can observe remotely.
Do we know if anyone is doing that? If they wish to use the facility to ask a question at the beginning, would they have to give notice of that?
Yeah, they'd have to give notice, or
we could perhaps. Is that made public?
It's advertised on our webpage.
So they can do that?
Yes.
Online, right, that's okay. The next item is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 24th of March 2022. And first of all, we need to know if there are any corrections to that, to any item on the minute, if anybody has seen any mistakes or omissions. No, nobody's doing? No. In that case, I move that we approve the minutes. All those in favour? Is anybody against? Okay, then that's passed. And to move on to matters arising from the minutes, anything that's in the minutes that you wish to pick up on that's not already on the agenda? Nobody doing that? Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very brief update on the England Coast Path, which was in the set of minutes. The section from Sutton Bridge to Skegness has now received approval from the Secretary of State late last week, so I couldn't get it in the minutes any earlier, the agenda any earlier. So that just leaves the one small stretch as part of the longer Mablethorpe to Humber Bridge section that remains unapproved, but we expect that to be in the near future, and then we can start working on the establishment works to actually physically make the path available, and then the opening will probably be in about 2 years once that's completed.
Yep. Of course, to the Humber Bridge, large part of that is in North Lincolnshire. To get right, North East Lincolnshire.
That's right, North East Lincolnshire and some in North Lincolnshire. It will be a partnership work, so Lincolnshire County Council and the two unitaries will work in partnership. Yeah. We will be looking to employ probably a trail officer to cover all three between us.
But of course, they are both within the remit of this local access forum. Anything else? Victor, did you have something you wanted to say? No. Then I'm going to move on to response to formal advice received from Local Access Forum. What exactly is that about? I'm not sure we have. Chris.
I think it was agreed to be a standing item for when formal advice had been received. On this occasion, we haven't received any advice from the Local Access Forum to respond to.
Right. And the item 6 is the Deregulation Act 2015. Before you speak, Chris, because it's your item here, verbal report, is this going to cover the abandonment of the 2026 cut-off? It is. Good. So that, I think, is what everybody wants to know. A lot of people want to know more about. So over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just a verbal update really from as much as we've been told by our colleagues at DEFRA through various channels back to the Rights of Way community. So yes, as the Chairman's just mentioned there, part of the combined package for the Deregulation Act was the idea that the definitive map would be closed to further applications for routes that existed before 1949 on the 1st of January 2026. The government now appears to wish to fully repeal that section and two elements that go alongside that, but are still keen to develop the other areas of the Deregulation Act, such as the right to apply for a public path order and other elements which will change the way that definitive map modification orders and public path orders are delivered. They still want to progress those. It's run into the buffers a little bit because the stakeholder working group, which was the group set up, which included landowners, local authorities, user groups and interests, to sort of put forward the package, they're pushing back a little bit at DEFRA on some of the elements that they're looking to achieve. So it's probably going to take a little longer than the autumn date that DEFRA had given previously for bringing forward the secondary legislation regulations that we need to know how we're going to implement the changes that they still wish to implement, if that makes any sense. And that's really as much as I can tell the forum just at this moment in time. It's a moving feast, and we get sort of drip-fed updates every now and again, and I'll try and sort of collate them together and present them at this point.
I was going to ask exactly what form do you get this drip feed in? Do they send out memos or briefing documents, or just speak to you on the phone, or what?
It usually comes by way of email to the chairman of the National Rights of Way Managers Adept Group, what used to be the County Surveyor Society, or to actually myself as president of the Institute of Public Rights of Way and Access Management at present, and then it's disseminated amongst those two bodies. They don't actually contact local authorities directly at the moment with this information, so it's left to us to do that, which we've said isn't really helpful because there will be people that we don't represent. We will have people in authorities that aren't members of the Institute of Public Rights of Way, and not all authorities are covered by ADEPT.
I was going to say, it doesn't sound like a proper sort of civil service route to me. But
we have pointed that out, Chairman, yes.
Speaking as a one-time civil servant myself. I've been, obviously, like all of those interested in this, been following what all of the user groups and anyone else who has an interest has to say about this. And a fairly prevalent view of it is that basically the government is just unable to cope with the workload it's given, or the civil services in its departments are unable to cope with the workload they've been given. With COVID, lots of civil servants were either sent on furlough, depending on what their job they were doing, or transferred to other work. And there was a big cut in the civil service before that anyway. And they've just bitten off more than they can chew. Is that the impression you have?
There has been an element of that. We are fortunate to some degree now is that there's a little bit more stability in the section that delivers against rights of way within DEFRA. And the person who's been appointed to try and deliver the rights of way reforms has now actually been in post for 6 months, which I think is longer than the previous two. So it does mean that we are actually seeing some momentum. Previously we were sort of almost in a holding pattern and we weren't really getting very far at all, and we kept pushing and pushing, but we at least are now hearing things, which is better.
I think that the difficulty that many of us have is that this is in effect a significant change in policy, and yet it does not seem to have been made by any official government process. We don't, not visibly so anyway.
That's right, Chairman. It's nothing on like the formal basis in terms of repeal or anything like that, but it is discussed at a ministerial level, so it has had that oversight from a political perspective.
I would look from a political decision like this for some kind of, at ministerial level, a formal explanation of the reasoning behind the decision. But we don't seem to be getting it. All right, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, so you carry on. With your, that's all you needed, all you wanted to say. So it was really just about that. Then I move on to item 6. Sorry, I missed the microphone.
You just want to formally note the previous...
Yes, shall I move that we note the report from the, what are you now called? Deputy Head of Environment, are you called? Yes.
It's close enough, Chairman. Yeah.
All right, so if we could have a formal acceptance of that report. So all those in favour, any against? Move on now to item 7, which is to receive a report from Peter Hinton on the processing of definitive map modification orders. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I tackled this from two aspects. The first is, this is not a criticism of Chris, by the way, but the time taken to implement changes is extraordinarily long. We as a forum, we understand why this occurs, but it is a deterrent to people making practical applications, would improve countryside access through the use of public rights of way. There has to be pressure applied to get changes in how this is regulated if it's going to benefit anyone at all. And basically, the submission is that DMMOs need to be able to simply take account of the change of land usage, both for the benefit of users to rights of way and indeed to the landowners themselves. There are classic examples all over the country where a public right of way is literally yards from a farm track which has been in use for many decades, and yet it blithely ignores the existence of a much easier route to maintain. That's only one example. There are many others. There are no end of footpaths which are completely neglected because they don't go anywhere. I live very close to the A1 and a number of public rights of way that terminate on the A1. Now, only a fool would dream of trying to cross as a pedestrian during most of the time, 24 hours of the day across the A1. But getting changes to these just seems to take forever. And the conversation actually started with a discussion with two large landowners in my part of the county in South Kesteven, pointing out that they were being obliged to maintain footpaths that are never used because they don't go anywhere. So it's not really for this LAF to make a policy change, but I think we do need to join with other LAFs and see if the regulations can be improved in some way to the benefit of all users and the landowners themselves.
Chris, do you want to say something first? I might have to say something about this.
Thank you, Mr. Hinton. Thank you, Chairman. There is an element of that within the rights of way reform package with regard to a right to apply for public path orders. So that would sort of alleviate some of that where at the moment local authorities can just say we're not able to progress that one just at the moment, we don't have the resources, there's no public benefit and so on, that there will become a right to apply. That's only a right to apply, it doesn't mean there's a right to actually have an order made at the end of it, admittedly, but that was one of the elements of the reform package. I think what you suggest would be quite a sweeping change to public rights of way management in effect, and would probably require primary legislation to enact it. Albeit that, yes, there are routes that perhaps have fallen out of usage, they are still a public right, and at the moment that is protected in law, regardless of the lack of usage. That would probably take primary legislation to alter that, and there is no likelihood on the horizon at present for primary legislation to cover rights of way work. We're struggling enough to even get secondary legislation to cover the primary legislation that's already been passed.
Well, I'm going to disagree with Chris, but first of all, just a small correction to something you said, Peter. You said DMMOs, and I think what you're actually talking about is what Chris said, which would be public path orders to divert paths. But it's an issue which I've been aware of for decades, because I've been involved in this kind of thing for decades. And I absolutely agree with you. Where one might get some differences between landowners and users is to exactly where the diverted paths ought to go to. But it's certainly very true that you get paths which are where, particularly as you've mentioned, main roads have been ploughed across the countryside, and no account has been taken of the footpaths. And these are often, this includes brand new roads where there was no road before. And what was once a path that might have been, even today, it might in theory be usable and go from somewhere to somewhere. Nobody wants to cross a dual carriageway where you know, you drive along a dual carriageway somewhere and you'll see a sign that says pedestrians crossing, and there's somewhere in the hedge, if you're eagle-eyed and hopefully a passenger not driving, you'll see a little sign saying footpath, and you think, well, how on earth is anybody supposed to cross there? I'll give one that particularly annoys me, is the footpath alongside the Sleaford Canal, or whatever it's called, the Slee the canal that's to the west of Sleaford, where the bypass was put over it, and the towpath, there was a bridge put over the canal, but not over the towpath, so that people have to climb up a very rough embankment to climb over a crash barrier twice to get past. But that's I'm getting off the point, really. But I don't agree with Chris that it requires primary legislation. Public path orders are there to divert public paths, and that is, I can't see how you could make anything that was different from that. They can be made for all sorts of reasons. The problem is that there just isn't enough resources put into this, and the officers, or the offices in the local authorities, tend to be just firefighting with an enormous backlog of work, of things that perhaps have to be done. And I took part in a meeting with, it was more a seminar, with one of the planning authorities in Lincolnshire. It was South Kesteven, with a whole room full of their planning officers, talking about how development affects rights of way and requires them to be diverted. And what I did talk about was the opportunity to improve the rights of way when this took place. But what we found was that the planning office was only interested in how can they deal with this need to cope with this path in the easiest and quickest way possible. I can understand why, because they are all snowed under with work and under enormous pressure to reduce the time they take to process applications. And if they had to negotiate with proposed new routes for footpaths, it would delay things. But the result is that you get housing estates built with diversions made that make the path longer but less convenient, when there will be an opportunity with a little thought to make it more convenient, more attractive, and less of a conflict with householders and other traffic and so on. But I'm rambling a little bit, but I think that the legislation is adequate. It needs the political will and the funding to take an imaginative look at these things and implement them. Chris wants to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. You know, you're absolutely right, and my apologies, I should have been clearer. When I was mentioning about primary legislation, I was talking more about the sweeping extinguishment of routes that are no longer used or are terminated dead ends, which that would require primary legislation to just do, because the normal caveat of not needed for public use is very difficult to meet. So in most cases, probably wouldn't actually end up with the desired effect that Mr. Hinton was mentioning. Regarding the planning element of it, that's something that we've outlined previously and was always part of the rights of way improvement plan, and will continue to be so when we get round to furthering that. Just on South Kesteven, we are in talks with, or about to be in talks with, the teams that process the public path orders to have similar sort of discussions, and we're reasonably fortunate that the lead on that is Graham Watts, who you may recall was the previous secretary of this local access forum. So he's moved down there and he's covering that sort of work as well. So there may be some changes in SK, and then whatever happens there, we may be able to start looking at how we roll that across the other planning authorities in the county.
we are up against the problem that it all creates more work for them. They would produce better outcomes, but they are always trying to cope with like everyone else. So too much work in a way. But remember also, I'm pleased to hear what you said, but of course South Kesteven was, to their credit, the only planning authority that responded to an invitation to take part in that kind of discussion.
And I think that's because they recognise the problems that they themselves as an authority are facing. Part of the discussion we'll be having is about resourcing and where we as an authority might be able to help. We may, decide how the fee could be split, from the developer, and where we can add that, because whatever ultimately we're trying to do, the district ought to be trying to reflect as well, and vice versa. So it's all round a good proposal. We just got to try and start to embed it.
Well, what I would say, and I think Peter will probably agree with me, if I said that most problems are also opportunities. And I think he expressed that sentiment in effect by saying that we can actually make better rights of way here by solving some of these rather absurdities which we can call problems.
I completely agree, Chairman. I do actually have a question back to Mr. Hinton, if that's okay.
Yes, if you're Mr. Hinton that's willing to accept through the chair, I will take it through the chair.
Thank you. Peter, the original sort of agenda item mentions definitive map modification orders, and my thoughts were that this was surrounding the recent applications made in your local area for routes that were not recorded on the definitive map originally, but there is some evidence potentially to suggest that they should have been recorded and have a definitive map modification definitive map modification order application, gets longer every time I say it, made for them. Is that the case? Was that going to be part of the question?
It did in fact stimulate the debate in my local area with landowners and householders for that matter, who were, one or two were very alarmed at the submission made on behalf of the British Horse Society, but it widened out to rural agricultural landowners' concerns about what they might be expected to do in the future, if you will. And I think the chairman actually hit part of it on the head. The issue around developments, which a lot of those applications on behalf of the British Horse Society seem to totally ignore the fact that the world has changed in the last 200 years, is part of the issue. And I'd probably point out that active town and parish councils do take a specific interest when they are looking at planning applications. But of course, all we can do as a parish council or town council is comment. We don't have any statutory right to say, no, we don't want that, or we can simply make planning officers aware that it is going to affect a public right of way. And certainly my parish council works quite hard at that, and we're not alone. I do wonder a bit, I've been attending these meetings now for some years, that what clout could the LAF exercise under present legislation? Because at present, it seems to be very limited, and this has been said in earlier meetings frequently, but it might be helpful to those bodies that are automatically consulted on planning applications, of which parish and town councils are only one, have advice from the LAF where it might affect a right of way. A simple guide, for example. I'm also speaking as an ex-local government officer, and the ignorance on some parish councils, not in Lincolnshire, I hasten to add, was broadcast loud and clear. They really did not know much about rights of way. So a simple guideline issued on our behalf might be very helpful. I understand the pressure on the planning system and indeed on planning officers. It frequently crops up at our meetings. But nevertheless, if you don't speak, you won't be heard.
Thank you for that, Peter. I'm going to say that perhaps the avenue that is logically to follow here is through those members of the authority who are members of the LAF, and to see if they can, so far as influencing the attitude of the authority, that they are there to be our link with the authority. I think it would be very helpful if we could work through them.
Chairman, sorry. The reason for my question back was I did a little bit of scratching around some figures based on what I thought the agenda item was, and just sort of kind of to highlight what Peter was saying there. This is, of course, a reflection of the legislation that we were just talking about, the Deregulation Act and the closure of the definitive map, that we are seeing significant increases in the number of applications for historic routes because people wanted to put them in before the deadline. We're not actually seeing a tailing off of that, even though the government have said they're going to repeal that. People have started their projects and want to carry them on. So it's not actually going to actually slow them down. What it is going to do is remove our ability to deal with them in a swift way, potentially.
I personally am very aware of that. I've had some involvement with it myself, and I have seen how the groups like the BHS and the Ramblers have, as it were, got their act together and got their funding together, and they have put in place their internal machinery for getting this job done, and that is of identifying all the missing rights of way. And I do not think they're going to stop, and I don't think they're wrong to not stop, because it's more efficient to do it that way. Once they've got their teams of volunteers and one or two supporting professionals, it's going to take them much less work per path to do it this way. I just want to go back to the point that you raised about how Peter came involved in this. I've been involved in making DMM applications over the years, and I've been in contact with many other people doing it. And a problem we often have is that it's obvious that the historic path, is not in the right place, but it might partly be in the right place, and it might be capable of being diverted or parts of it used as part of a major improvement that would be really useful. And it's very understandable that when the application is announced and people receive a copy of it through the post and so on, they are very alarmed. And it would be very helpful if at the very first stage it could be made very clear that it will be hoped that if the application is successful, and very often these applications are made on solid evidence, they're almost bound to be successful, that it is the path will definitely be diverted or partially stopped up or whatever is necessary, and it will not be going to go through your front lawn, it won't be going to go through your living room, it won't be going to all these dreadful things. And a particular point I've raised with Chris in the past is that it isn't necessary legally to process a definitive map modification order before making a diversion. You can make a diversion order, provided that everybody accepts that the right of way is there, no one's objecting to the order. You can make the diversion order, and then the DMMO will not be necessary, or at least it won't be necessary. It might not be necessary. It won't be necessary to make a new diversion order after the DMMO has been processed.
Absolutely, and we've been doing that for a number of years. In fact, I can recall back about my very early days, 20 odd years ago, we were doing that, what we used to call it a diversion of a non-definitive path. And usually it reflected development work where there was a proposal for housing and there was a definitive map application, modification order application, and we would divert that if providing that, of course, the landowner accepted it existed in the first place, which sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't.
I have to tell you that I have received a letter this year in respect of such a DMMO, in which it was written the County Council cannot make the diversion without first making the definitive map order.
And I know exactly which one you're talking about, and we can discuss it later.
Right.
At Hoff Lane. Just on the proposal you were suggesting there, it forms part of the deregulation package, the reform package for the idea of what was called the definitive map consent order. So rather than actually processing a definitive map order for a particular line, if the landowner could come up with a proposal of an alternative that ran to the same effect, that didn't go through the middle of the garden or through the farm or whatever, but ran somewhere close by, we would process that as the alternative as opposed to strictly following the evidence of what was the historic line. So that's part of the package of reforms that DEFRA still want to bring in. That's one of them, which we would all see as a benefit. We agree completely. Just by way of sort of concluding some of the things that I'd looked at based on the agenda item, you're all aware that we have a significant backlog of definitive map modification orders. We now have on the books 239 cases, of which 223 are applications from the public or outside of the County Council's discovery of evidence process. And we know we have others pending that are waiting to be registered onto the system. And since April 2021, that's been an increase of 87, which is quite significant over that time frame. It far outstrips what we're used to. And of course, our resources don't change. So yeah, that's something that we have warned DEFRA over, that particularly if applicants become quite savvy to the idea that after 12 months, they can apply to the Secretary of State, and at the moment they're almost certainly going to receive support, and authorities will be being directed to make decisions. That's going to put a real pressure on the existing resources in nearly all local authorities. This isn't a Lincolnshire issue. This is nationwide.
I'll just point out that an extra complication here is that a lot of the recent research, we've been talking about teams being set up by the Ramblers Association and so on, is working on historic documents, which tend to be, first of all, very strong evidence, and also very old evidence. So they're the ones which are most likely to create problems because of modern development, if they've been forgotten about for a long time. But also the ones which are most likely to go through. And those two factors are the thing that make desirable just the thing we've been talking about, of agreeing diversions and agreeing which one, or possibly in some cases where there are ones where urban development is spread across a path in its entirety and there's just nothing you can do with it except you just have to grab it. But these are the ones where the kind of processes we're talking about are really going to be needed. You're going to have a lot of them. But again, also they're the ones often which present great opportunities for providing people with really good, high quality countryside access where they want it. We're taking rather a long time on this, and I'm aware that there might be people on online who might want to contribute. So,
Sid Mill wanted to.
Okay, so Sid Mill, please.
Right. I was recently asked to look at a footpath that had been used for many years. It appeared on OS maps. It had bridges and stars that had been erected by the council and is classed as a public right-of-way. Then a few years ago, it was marked up as a permissive path as a clerical error had been marked up on the definitive map. It marked it on the definitive map in the wrong place. It was suggested by the council footpath officers that I raise a DMMO to clear this up. On checking the council's records, there was one already lodged with the council, by the council, on the 30th September 2005, 17 years ago. The last time I looked, it was showing as number 83 on a list of 217, which has now increased apparently. And it looks like it will not be resolved in my lifetime. Investigating further, there were DMMOs filed as far back as 1985, which have still not been processed. Now, I understand that the council can prioritise, but surely there must be a limit in time, and this is where this new legislation or new action plan needs putting into place, that there must be a time limit, surely, to process these things, or what is the point of going to the trouble of producing them, gathering witness statements, when the time to process starts, the witnesses are dead?
I thank you for that question, and Chris Miller is going to respond to it. Whether he'll answer it or not is another matter.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I'll very much try. I think in the just to cover the specific case you mentioned, it sounds very much to me like if it was back in 2005, I suspect that was at the point we discovered that the definitive public right-of-way wasn't as we suspected it. we signed it as permissive because it wasn't shown on the definitive map, and initiated a definitive map modification process. I think the attempt to ask you to make an application for that, I can understand it to a degree, because once you have an applicant, there are statutory fail-safes, whereas if we as an authority work it under the discovery of evidence, no one can press us to do it within any given time frame. However, if there's an applicant, there are some statutory fail-safes. So I mentioned earlier, if we haven't made a decision on a case within a year as to whether or not we're going to make an order, we can be pushed to do so. That forms part of it. So by having an application, it gives a person, an individual or a council, a parish council potentially, the opportunity of pushing the local authority, the county council, into action, whereas we wouldn't have done so otherwise. So hopefully that covers the reason why, even though there was already something on the books, as it were. Your question or your point is very well made, and as the chairman knows, something we have struggled with for very, very many years. I suspect back in 1983, when the continual update of the definitive map was brought into force, I wasn't around then, but I suspect this authority didn't put any resources towards doing that. However, there were, well-motivated user groups and individuals waiting for the legislation to hit, and submitted a lot of applications there and then, right at the outset, and we start with a backlog, and I don't think we've ever caught up. So yes, there are cases that are historic. What we try to do, or have always tried to do, is balance that against current need. So you quite rightly point out where you've got user evidence-based cases where people have filled in an evidence form and would reasonably expect the authority to start acting as soon as it possibly could. Do those outweigh those ones where it's an enclosure award documentary evidence one, where nobody's actually used the path in 200 years, but actually could probably be very useful if it was available? And it's striking those balances that we continually strive. And I will freely admit, I'm not sure we always get that balance right, but it's always done with the best intention of trying to do it that way.
I'm going to reply to that and point out that it's a bit of a fiction that getting an application in means that you've got some standing in the matter and can move it forward. The County Council has to make a decision within 12 months, or at least if it doesn't, you can appeal to the Secretary of State. But the decision is only to make an order at some time in the future, and there is no time limit on how long it can leave it lying on the table, having made the decision to make the order before it makes an order, and worse than that, it is free to change its mind, as has happened to me, as Chris knows. And it becomes increasingly difficult, of course, if witness evidence has been relied on, and there are applications made in the 1980s, as you point out, where there were many people alive who could remember using the path regularly. They could remember when it was a perfectly ordinary path recognised by everybody. And those people are now all dead. Because the order, in any rational way of dealing with these things, the order would have been made in the late 1980s, and it would have been a useful path for the last 30 years.
I cannot disagree, Chairman. You were absolutely right, and it's just one of those things that we are continually striving to try and find a way of being able to deliver that better. In terms of some of the points you make, you're quite right. It is only a direction to make a decision. However, our own internal policies are that once we have made decisions, we will process them. They will become active cases in terms of the case officer having them. So we would hope to see those through. That's our internal policy. It's in our.
But this applies to these paths which have been sitting there since the 1980s.
We are working through the ones where decisions have been made first, and the ones where no decision has been made yet will be secondary to those where we've made a decision. And yes, in terms of changing our mind, again, our internal policies are that you cannot change your mind. If you've made a decision, you've made a decision. If you've communicated that to the applicant and the public at wide, you have made that decision corporately. What you have to do is make an order and then object to it. You can't just say, no, we've decided not to make an order anymore. But it's still, if the evidence no longer stands to scrutiny because the law has changed, for example.
I accept that correction, but if the authority ceases to support the order, then it has much the same effect. Right. Does anybody else want to say anything about the... David, can you speak, please?
Oh, it may be that this is a rather long-winded question to this, and something that I might need to talk on a longer term over with professionals who they. But stupid question, I suppose. But why on earth do these footpath orders and definitive map orders take so long? Surely there's steps of 5 or 6 steps that need to go through that could be probably relatively quickly and sorted out sensibly. Why does it take so long? Is that a big question that's going to take longer than this meeting to answer?
David, are you asking Chris to respond to that? We've kind of talked around it already quite a lot. Are you making a point, or do you want a particular answer? It's a point we all take, by the way.
Yeah, maybe it's such a big question. I still don't get why these things take so long. I know you say resources, whatever, there must be legal backgrounds to it. Maybe it's something that I need to discuss with other professionals so that myself can begin to understand. You guys have got a lot of experience and have learned a lot over the time, and maybe that's something that I need to do, is talk separately outside of this meeting. Maybe it's going to take longer than this meeting to explain to me, to get me to understand why these things take such long to do.
Chris, would you say it's primarily just lack of resources?
I think David sort of pretty much hit the nail on the head there. That it is resources, but also by their very nature, the majority of the cases we're dealing with are not confrontational. That's not perhaps the right word, but there is always someone suggesting that what you're doing is not right, that it does affect them adversely, and that it isn't right, and you shouldn't be doing it. And don't underestimate the amount of time that correspondence takes in that regard. It's just trying to get through all that. And yeah, the resources element is key, and officers juggle as many cases as they can at once. But of course, if they're in the middle of doing one case, that means there's 3 cases on their caseloads that aren't being dealt with in that week, for example. Then that pushes times. And
I think a point I would make here is that if you reduce the amount of resources you put into performing a task, there comes a point it gets less and less efficient. And you get to the point, in fact, when I was first involved with the rights of way, I think the county council had about 2 people working on the documentary side of it, and about the same number working on out in the field, mending gates and things like that. And the situation had been reached where those 2 people did nothing but write letters to people who had complaints about the state of the footpaths, replying, effectively just acknowledging the letter and putting it in the pile. And then they spent all day just sending out letters like that, and nothing got processed at all. And we are not quite as bad as that, but you get into that situation. If you have enough resources, you can get the job done quickly, and it actually takes much less work each path you do. But things get, when you have each officer is dealing with dozens and dozens of cases, and they probably spend a lot of time just deciding which one to pick up next.
Not so much, but the point is taken. And just by way of example, I mentioned earlier about the number of applications we received in a short space of time. I think we received 50 in the space of a couple of months, not that long back. I only have dealing with the processing of that a part-time officer. She works 2.5 days a week. So it's getting to the stage now where we have applications in that we've not registered. But of course, the landowner has received a notice saying there's a process started. They phone us up. They want to know all about it, but we haven't even registered it yet. So we then have a case officer having to research something that they're never actually going to be dealing with for a while, quite frankly, but having to spend time doing that rather than actually getting on with the cases which are active in their caseload, because they're actually dealing with things, just trying to explain things to people because of the sheer amount of things we're getting. And I think that's basically real life.
You're illustrating my point. But
exactly.
If you don't have enough resources, this kind of thing goes on all the time. I'd use an analogy here. If you're wanting to drive a nail in, and it's a 6-inch nail, and all you've got is a tin tack hammer, you can hit it 1,000 times and it won't move an inch. if you have a big enough hammer, you can hit it once and it'll go all the way. Basically, you don't have a big enough hammer. A poor analogy because it suggests hitting things rather than being constructive, but you see the point.
I'm beginning to understand now that it's not just a matter of going through a process. There's a lot of other things that come in, like objections, what about this, what about that. So therefore can draw off the resources from where things is going well, as it might be, to having to address this. So therefore it just complicates the issue. I can understand that. Thank you for that, Chris. I do understand a lot more why these things do take a long time. Thank you.
I think I ought to move on. I'm giving a lot of time to talk because the items on the agenda really do call for it, and we don't have too crowded an agenda. But I'll move on to number 8, footpath. Oh yes, so I'm sorry. Yes, so we can move that we note the verbal report from Chris Miller. All those in favour? Any against? Okay, that's passed. Item 8, footpath priority list. Now this is a report from Sid Mill.
When an obstruction of a footpath is reported, it's given a priority rating, as in priority 1, routes actively promoted by Lincolnshire County Council, Viking Way, bridle trails, recreational walk routes. Well, as a walker, all walk routes are recreational to me. But one thing that does confuse me, and I think is possibly misunderstood, is the effects of the weather on footpaths. Seasonal changes. Footpaths with overgrown vegetation can be caused by sudden change in the climate. And I understand the county teams cannot clear all these at once, and with limited time and resources, it's understandable. But often blocked footpaths are caused by landowners not reinstating footpaths after sowing crops. And crops grow quickly and block the right of way. When reporting this type of problem, I am sent back notification of it being a priority 2, which could take 4 months to be dealt with. Sometimes county footpath officers deal with them quicker, and I thank them for that. But it can happen that crops such as rape, maize grow so quickly that paths are impassable for several months. And by the time the 4 months are up, and this is 4 months from the time of reporting, not from 4 months from the crop growing, the crop is harvested, the land is cleared, and the problem appears to have disappeared. But then again, it reappears the following year. And we go through the same process again. Can cropping be given a higher priority? I'm asking Chris this, please.
Go on, Chris.
Thank you, Sid. And I can confirm that it already is. So in terms of what you're describing there, which are what we class as a Rights of Way Act infringement after the Rights of Way Act 1990, which would include the ploughing out of a crossfield route or a field edge route, or the obstruction of the same by crops, we prioritise those generally across the priority 1 and 2 network of public rights of way, which is about 76% of the total network of the authority's area. The reason why the time frames are as they are is that there's some statutory hoops we have to jump through in terms of serving notice, and we have to give landowners a period of time to respond to that. And if there is no compliance, obviously we then have to start the next stage of the process, which again would take longer. So in terms of trying to estimate how long it will be from the receipt of the report from a member of the public to having the route cleared, we take a view of what the kind of average life time frame is for getting compliance out of the third party offender. So that's why they're set at priority 1 takes 3 months, priority 2 4 months, and that's basically because there's also, we have to factor in how quickly an officer can get around the patch to be able to find these. They obviously have to walk to site, make sure that the report is accurate, that the right of way is being obstructed, take photos, come back to the office, prepare letters and so on, and then issue them, then follow it up and check, and so on and so on. So the time frames we found, I mean, those have been in place for a number of years. We did increase them from 2 months and 3 months respectively when we altered the policy back in 2012, because we found we weren't meeting those targets. So there was no point telling the public that things would be resolved in that time frame if, quite frankly, it wasn't going to happen.
Sid, do you want to respond to that at all?
Yes, I will admit that I get a lot of reports of overgrown vegetation that I never report to the council because I see them as a temporary thing, and I understand that council footpath officers and workers have a maintenance routine which they'll get round to. I usually only report things that I see as a constant, possibly year in, year out type of problem or something that's most unusual. So, you know, I fully understand nothing's going to happen immediately, but there are one or two landowners who constantly grow crops over footpaths year in, year out. And even when it's been reported, they still seem to do it. So, yeah, I understand everybody's busy, particularly when it's been hot weather and a lot of rain. But yeah.
Thank you. So
Thanks, Chris.
You're absolutely right. And we do obviously have repeat offenders, and our policies are geared towards more constructive enforcement against reoffenders as opposed to first time, or people who we haven't seen for a long time. So we have an escalating scale of enforcement, from informal approach to a warning letter to formal notice to ultimately a notice for 24-hour clearance. If you've had one or two of those, then you really are looking at prosecution. And there are some, we are aware, that sail quite close to the wind. One of the other tools in our armoury at the moment is that we can report reoffenders to the Rural Payments Agency, which may trigger an inspection under cross-compliance laws, which may see a deduction in their financial packages, which obviously that helps concentrate their mind a little bit. And we do see, where we have made those submissions to the RPA, that we are seeing better levels of compliance in following years. That's something that we continue to do at the moment as well.
Does the RPA respond to that?
Not on every occasion, but
No. There have been occasions.
That's the lottery and the jeopardy for the landowner a little bit.
But you can say there are cases where they have done.
And we have a couple ongoing at present.
Yeah. I was going to say that, I mean, the last resort presumably would be to seek an injunction.
Well, just prosecute. We'll prosecute for
Yeah.
the offence, and that would lead to a criminal record. We haven't done that in this authority. We've not felt there's been a need to, but we reserve the right to do so whenever it would appear appropriate.
Yeah. And I think it comes down yet again to the fact that there are just too many offenders going on and not enough people.
Indeed, although I would say that,
tackling.
in my time at the authority since 1996, the levels of compliance now are far, far higher than they used to be.
And I'd agree with that.
Thanks in part to the Rights of Way Act 1990, which gave us better tools to deal with it, which, of course, as the chairman knows, but others might not, was actually a result of a Lincolnshire campaign and Sir Edward Lee presenting a private member's bill to change the law on rights of way enforcement.
There is also a cultural change that when I was first involved with this, there was a generation of farmers who had grown up with and lived their lives with paths not being maintained, a thing that going back to the Second World War, when food production was a priority and not many people were out there walking the paths. Right, I'll move on now to, if everyone's happy with that, I'm losing track now, Robert. But we need to. Do we need to vote on this one as well? Yes, and we just approve the verbal report from Chris Miller on this side. From Sid. I mean, I beg your pardon, Sid. Does everyone agree with that? Thank you. Right, move on to item 9, Countryside for All. Over to John Law, who is actually sitting in the room here opposite me.
Thanks, Chris. First of all, I neglected to mention that, I think we mentioned that Richard Graham has left the LAF last time. I'd like the LAF to send a letter of thanks to him for what he's done on the Countryside for All team and also the Coastal Country Park, if that can be done through the Secretary, please.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, absolutely, I agree. Can we do that? Yep.
Thank you. I've not got much extra to report other than what's down here in front of you. There's various bits of good news. We've had the manager over the social prescribing team over the whole of Lincolnshire involved in ordering leaflets. We have got a problem though with the Coastal Country Park walk leaflets. We don't seem to have any, but they've ordered a few of those. But if we can possibly look at that for next year, so I can get them out. The other good news is that the Spalding, I'm going to say Spalding Guardian, it may be Spalding Gazette, a reporter from there.
Sorry.
Still on? Yeah. A report from the Spalding Guardian wants to do an article regarding the countryside and walking, and picked it up through looking at the laugh minutes. So Debbie Braun from Lincolnshire County Council and Gemma, I think it's Gemma Wright, who is the manager of the social prescribing team, going to be talking to her, and hopefully we'll see an article come out promoting Rights of Way and Countryside for All in the future. And they've also got some sister papers in Lincolnshire, of which I've not written down here, but there's, I believe Grantham's one of them, and probably Bourne as well. So that's quite helpful. Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to know, and sorry Chris Miller, my apologies, when I saw in the minutes that you were responding to the formal advice received from the Local Access Forum, I wondered whether, and we didn't formally present it to you, but did you get any further with CAMS and our hope that CAMS would be reintroduced and funded, because that will help a lot in terms of how we get people with limited mobility to access the countryside?
It's unlikely that CAMS as a IT product will be invested in by the authority, because we're still driving down the route of using other packages, Confirm and Fix My Street, namely. However, that's not to suggest that we can't develop something within our own web team potentially, to enable what you are suggesting in terms of the public-facing mapping. It might have to be a separate project in its own right, and it might take a little bit of time to get to it, given the resources levels that we've got. But that is the opportunity, as opposed to investing in CAMS, which could have done it in a different way.
Can the LAF be involved in that, so that we actually look at all the things that were suggested in that original report?
I see no reason why not, in terms of suggesting what information you think the public would like to see. We would look at, working with you on that to try and develop that information, and then display it in some way across our web platform.
Can I ask Chris and John, for the benefit of anyone listening who doesn't quite know what we're talking about, what CAMS is?
Apologies, Chairman. Of course, yes, it's the Countryside Access Management System. It's a third-party IT product that helps manage asset management work on public rights of way.
Thank you.
So what we would be looking at was obstructions like steps in the countryside, and be able to show where those steps are, so people can choose, if they're able to manage those steps or not. At the moment, people don't know, apart from there's a public right of way, they don't know what is out there in terms of the assets, I believe, in most cases.
That's right, and to be fair, we as an authority struggle with that. It's a 4,000 kilometre network, and there's lots and lots of stiles, gates, bridges, steps, signposts, and so on. And we don't have a record of all of them. It's something that we were developing at the time we still had CAMS. Our intention is that once we have Confirm up and running, it will probably, we estimate it will take about 5 years to populate it with every individual structure, because that's our cyclic inspection regime is 20% of the network per annum. So by the time we've been around for 5 years, we should have captured the issues you're picking up. So we should be able to display where a stile is, which would mean it might, mean someone chooses a different route or something like that.
Thank you for that, Chris. I think that unless anyone's got any questions on the report. That's me. I would say, though, that if anyone's interested in being a Countryside for All ambassador, we have a meeting tomorrow, but you can see the draft roll in the minutes here, and especially if there's anyone in the Mablethorpe area, because we're looking at the moment we've got nobody in the northern area of the county since Richard finished, so it would be good.
Okay, well, is there anybody online who has any questions for John?
Thank you. Is Angie Tomlin first?
Okay, Andrew Tomlin. Angie Tomlin.
No, my question wasn't for John. I wanted to ask a question at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
Sandra Harrison.
Sandra Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to apologise for being late joining you. Unfortunately, Specsavers took longer than I expected it would. So I only joined the meeting at, I think it was item 7. And under this item, I would like to raise something, if I may. I've read the report about the update about the coastal path, but I've got a query from the parish councils and the communities that are involved in the area next door to the SSI at Saltfleetby and Thistlethorpe. They have never been consulted, actually, and I see here that all the routes are decided now. Should they have been consulted, or at least put in the picture, even if it wasn't consultation? In a way, they were almost surprised to discover that we'd got to this stage. So I would be pleased if somebody could actually suggest that one. We've also got a problem about access to the beach, etc., for riders, which is coming up again. So I don't know whether I need to have a discussion with you, Chairman, out of the meeting or with Chris, but they have asked me to take that as well.
Well, I'm looking at
Thank
Chris
you.
Miller.
Yeah.
I'm very surprised to hear that about parish councils not being consulted.
Yes, and I know for a fact that they were. I mean, it was quite some time ago now, Sandra, because obviously the Marine and Coastal Access Act was passed in 2009, so it could be that the parish council membership has changed since then, but as an organisation, they will have been contacted. In fact, I remember standing in the Saltfleetby Parish Hall discussing it with them. So I know that it happened.
I wonder, Sandra, as a question of just an individual councillor you've talked to who wasn't aware of it. Could that be the case? Oh, she's on mute, right.
Just with regards the secondary element regarding horse riding, then obviously I'll quite happily discuss offline any particular concerns over a particular location.
Yeah. Sandra, can you hear us? Is it possible to?
You're on mute, Sandra.
I can't text her.
She can hear us.
Yes, sorry, I thought we'd finished the conversation.
No, Chris is.
And I can't hear you well.
Sorry, Chris was offering to talk to you about it afterwards. Is that acceptable?
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah. David Salkeld. If I can get your name right, David.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just a quick question to John and to other user groups here. He was talking about for Access for All, the fact that there was a system, I gather, that would show where various obstacles were for disabled people. Do the organisations, user organisations, have their own mapping system that might show that? For instance, through the Green Lane Association for Vehicle Rights Way, we have what's called Trailwise, our own mapping system, that is available to members. That it's members through Discuss, it's called, can put points through saying there's an obstruction here, there's problems here, this is this, and it is verified through officers and back through local reps. These things can be verified. And therefore, it means that the users can log on there and find out what's happening. So I'm just wondering if other user groups, such as the Ramblers or whatever, other user groups, do have anything like that available to their members.
Perhaps I could try and answer that. I think the answer is it will vary very much around the country. I don't know of anyone in Lincolnshire who's doing that. I would be pretty sure there are local groups around the country who will have done this kind of work, but does anyone else have anything? I'm looking at John and Chris here, both sort of shaking their head, I think.
I think what you've suggested there, Chairman, is accurate, that it does happen in local areas, but I'm not aware of any in Lincolnshire.
No. David, is that, well, that's all we can say really, but I think it's impressive if that's what you've been doing.
The Trailwise that is with, well, actually, is what actually sells the membership to the Green Lane Association, because they can see where the vehicle rights of way are and information about them. And I think Chris has still got access to it. I hope so, or if not, we can get it sorted. It's there, and I just wondered if that's done nationally. Okay, so I mean, Scotland's a different kettle of fish, but it's done actually nationally by a national organisation. I didn't know whether, for example, the British Horse Society might have something, or the Ramblers Association might invest in something like that for their members. But probably don't.
John Law's wanting to speak. So, John.
Yes, it just occurred to me that the Peak District National Parks have a Miles Without Styles project, and I believe they do identify the paths without the styles, but I've not looked at it myself, but they were certainly working on that. And Rutland County Council, Rutland County Council, the Rutland LAF, together with the Rutland County Council, are looking at trying to do that. But of course, it's a lot smaller area than Lincolnshire County Council.
I'm just wondering if North Lincolnshire might do something like this, because they're pretty good on that sort of thing of their record keeping. My guess is that we'll find that it'll be, as you say, the smaller areas that have managed to do this, where they have done it. I'm sure I've heard of somewhere where they've photographed every single right of way, but I can't remember where, how large an area, so that you can go online and actually see what it's like. But keeping something like that up to date is a big task. Yes, Victor.
John pointedly asked me, sort of indicated he might want me to respond about the possibility of an ambassador within this area. My difficulty is that I'm relatively new to the area this time, because I moved away in '63, and I am interested, particularly because of the development that we're doing with the Sandylands golf course, which will provide something similar to what John's talking about with the Freeston area of Boston. So I am interested in being available and processing on that. I'm not sure what it would be required to be an ambassador, and I'm not. I'm not disabled in any way, but I'm aware of the situation with the vast number of people in Mablethorpe who are using 3-, 4-, and 5-wheeled vehicles regularly, and which I have to avoid on the footpaths and on the roads in the Mablethorpe and Sutton area. So I am interested in continuing making a conversation with John about it.
I have to say I've made the same observation in Mablethorpe myself. But John and Victor, are you okay then to get in touch with each other?
Yes, I think what we will have in the future is another meeting with the organisation, so that we can talk about things, and I'll involve you in that, if that's okay with you. Yeah? Thanks very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
David, you want to speak again?
Yeah, just one little point. You're talking about local authorities doing this. Have you already seen me at all?
Sorry, what was that?
You're talking about whether local authorities have got this mapping system or information. What I was asking is if any user groups, national user groups, would consider doing this, as have done with the Green Lane Association, for motor vehicle users. In other words, allowed that for their members to use.
The short answer is none of us here are aware of any national organisation doing that, like the BHS or Ramblers. But we could inquire. Fairly obviously, the task would be an enormous one. It's much a bigger one than for carriageways or than the boats and byways. It's also much more fluid, isn't it? It's difficult to keep track with DMMOs and diversions and so on. But we can make inquiries. We can make inquiries and see what's happening. I think that with the work that's being done on DMMOs, the researching for the now Council 2026, I think quite a lot of the researchers in that have built up their own databases of what paths exist. But again, it's going to be something that people are doing independently rather than part of a system, I think. But we can but make inquiries. Oh yes, so Angie Tomlin, you were wanting to speak, weren't you?
Yeah, I was trying to answer his question the first time. No, the BHS and the British Driving Society, nor any other equestrian organisations that I'm a part of have anything like that at all, nor any plans, I believe, to do something like that, because they are not funded as well as people might think they are.
Yes.
Anything we do in the way of DMMOs and research is done almost wholly by volunteers. Yeah. And we're using our local knowledge, rides that we've been on in the past, and we're also using the Lincolnshire definitive map to do some of our research with, as well as the old maps at Edinburgh and places like that. We're using real old-fashioned technology to find routes to use that are off-road, and it's long and laborious, and it takes a long time, and we have to do a lot of walking. So something like the Green Lane Association would be absolutely wonderful, but I can't see it happening in my lifetime.
No. Well, thank you. Sid?
The Ramblers Association headquarters recently brought this matter up and asked for volunteers. That is the problem. Volunteers are not forthcoming.
Yeah.
As Chris said, I mean, there's 2,500 miles of footpath in Lincolnshire. I also cover North Lincolnshire and North East Lincolnshire, so I don't know how far I would have to walk to actually come up with this. But we are looking for volunteers. But I think it's an almighty task, and to be honest, I can't see it being completed, although national headquarters are aiming to get it done, but I think there's just too much happening at the moment for it to be done successfully nationally.
Perhaps one day there'll be a flight of drones patrolling them regularly. John, you wanted to have we'll have to wrap this one up soon, John, but carry on.
Sorry. Yeah, I made a couple of recommendations in my report and then neglected to tell you about them. So, as you're aware from last time, we agreed that businesses could sponsor the leaflets that we produce. So we need a process to actually get the letters out to businesses. And what I'm suggesting is that the letters to businesses for applications for funding should be on LAF-headed paper with the LAF chairman's signature. I wonder whether that's a process that we could include the LAF secretary for actually getting, once the letters are agreed between myself and the chair, the secretary could send them out.
I'm going to look at Chris Miller and say, is there some other way we could do this? I'm a little bit hesitant to kind of step outside the proper statutory role of the LAF. It's like making us into a standalone organisation rather than a body that advises the local authorities. Could the county council have it done in your name?
Which recommendation was it, John? Sorry.
So what we want to do is to go to businesses and ask for them to sponsor various leaflets. So the recommendation on page 11, where we want it to go on headed paper and a signature from somebody so as it looks official, rather than my what I would do at the moment through funding applications. It's just my name in most cases.
So, in answer to the chairman's question, my recollection is that quite a long time ago, when local access forums were first set up, that advisory element was to the fore. However, it was recognised after sort of ROIPs had started to be being developed and after open access land had been confirmed that there were opportunities to look outside the box, as it were, in terms of things to do, in terms of project-led work. So I can't see that there would be anything to stop it. I don't think it would need to be the county council. My worry would be I don't really have the resources or the officer time to lend too much time to assist. Where we can, we will. Obviously.
John is just asking that it's not the resources, it's just the name it goes out in, isn't it?
Basically, yes, because I'll do the work if you're in agreement with the letter.
Yeah. Well, if you're sure that we're not going outside of our remit, then
I'm fairly confident that was looked at quite some time ago, because I think local access forums were looking for things more to do, have more impact.
Let's put it to the vote of the people asking if they think it's acceptable for this to be done in the name of the LAF. John is proposing it. We have a proposer and a seconder in the room. So, and all those in favour, could they indicate? Can I ask Robert to? Yeah, so that yes, we've approved that then.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've lost my place now. We're still on Countryside for All, aren't we? So if I can move to permissive access, item 10, which is John again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So you will see from the hopefully you all received the Rutland LAF paper that they sent to Lord Benyon, and what I was wondering was whether we could do something similar, because I think the more people that, or more organisations that raise it, there's more of a chance of something happening. I know the Ramblers and the BMA, the British Horse Riding Society, have also sent a letter to, I think it was a different minister, but I think we need to do this to try and make sure we do get funded permissive access outside the national parks and areas of outstanding national beauty.
Chris.
Yes, absolutely, John. So for members not aware, the Environmental Land Management Scheme that was European-led has obviously come to a close, and the government is looking at the opportunities for a new Environmental Land Management Scheme. And some members of the forum may recall Michael Gove's statements regarding public money for public goods. And of course, access was one of the things that was considered a public good. It's still not been completely confirmed that access will definitely form part of environmental land management schemes going forward, but we are still making those overtures, as are other local access forums and other interested bodies in access. The one caveat I would suggest to the report that John submitted is that we as local authorities would much rather that this was paid for public access and not permissive. That the money was given for permanent rights, not rights that expire after 10 years like they were previously, because it's just caused us a lot of problems.
John?
Well, I was just thinking if the whole of the forum agreed with what Chris said, there's no reason why we can't include that in a letter to whichever minister we decide to send it to.
Yes. Can you provide a draft so that we can just sort of sign it if we approve it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll do that for the...
Well, I'll put it to a vote then, that we send a letter to the minister calling on... you're wanting it amended to say public access, payments for public access to be included in...
Additional public access.
Yes.
We don't want to be
yes.
the ones that are currently...
Well, you'll be... Yeah.
The other thing, sorry, both Chris's, would be to send it to all of the MPs in Lincolnshire, so that there's a bit of a push from hopefully one or two.
Yeah, we can put something together for that, can't we? Yeah.
Okay.
So, do we have approval for that then? You did propose it, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, that is seconded, yes. Robert? Yes, that's passed overwhelmingly. That's dealt with that item then, and we've only one item apart from picking the dates and so on for the next meeting, which is John again to talk about Huddle. John, do you want to explain what Huddle is, because it's so long ago that I can remember, but I haven't heard the word mentioned for a long time.
In actual fact, it's probably not worth explaining because it's gone.
Right.
But basically, it was a way of different LAFs communicating and spreading the word and the messages of what they were working on, and trying to get others to see what they were doing and probably help them in doing something if they've already started it. But DEFRA has got rid of Huddle completely, so it wasn't just something that was there for the LAFs. But speaking to Natural England, there's something else on its way, but they won't give a time limit on it. So it's just to make people aware that if you try looking for Huddle, you're not going to find it.
Well, I doubt many people are looking for it. And I always found it terribly inefficient. It's a pity if people are thinking about doing this, that they don't put out a little bit more feelers about what people want and what they think was wrong with it, and what they would like something to do.
I think the problem is it's whatever it was. I mean, Huddle was DEFRA rather than Natural England.
Yeah.
And I assume from the conversation I had, it would be something similar again. It would be DEFRA rather than Natural England. And
Yeah.
I don't think there's that many people working in Natural England
No.
under access at the moment.
Yeah, they've been cut to the absolute bone across all their activities.
Yeah.
But I think one of the problems with this having a platform like this is I don't think they work unless somebody's actively managing them, and that's where the hurdle comes, because that means staff time and money. Trying to make them so that they just sort of manage themselves doesn't really work, in my experience. But that's just a personal opinion. Well, then we're moving on now to the last item, which is agendas and times and dates for the next meeting. Does anybody want to make suggestions for agenda items? Remember, you can always email them in later. Angie?
Yes, thank you. The question I wanted to ask, and I don't know whether we can put it on for next time, is a lot of Lincolnshire County Council's forward planning for access, be it for walking, cycling, horse riding, carriage driving, off-roading, whatever it is. They get a lot of their information from the Strava system. And unfortunately, the Strava system only records walking and cycling, which means that any of us undergoing other activities than walking and cycling can't be included in their forward planning. Many lobby groups around the country have tried to approach Strava to get them to include horse riding and carriage driving in their app, but with no success whatsoever. So I would like to ask a formal question: why are Lincolnshire County Council not taking account of any horse riders or carriage drivers in the county?
I'm going to ask Chris to reply to that, but I would ask him also to just give a description again, bearing in mind there'll be people listening who don't quite know what this system is. If you could give a brief introduction to it.
Of course, and that will be tempered by my understanding of what Strava is, because we don't actually use it. So I'm not quite sure which sections Angie's referring to, but the rights of way section don't use Strava. We don't analyse Strava or do any forward planning based on Strava. So I'm not quite sure what part of County Council you might be referring to. Cool. My understanding is that Strava is it's like a mobile phone application, and it can track where you've been, So if you have a route that a lot of people have used and have recorded doing so through Strava, it produces what you'd call a heat map, which shows things in a darker red, a lighter red, depending on the amount of usage. So you could, if you were looking at it, deduce where perhaps your pressure points might be for investment or maintenance or whatever. I am aware that it only really reflects walking and cycling, but as I say, the rights of way team don't engage with it. When we get to looking at the rights of way improvement plan, we may do, but it would only be on the basis that it reflects walking and cycling. It doesn't reflect the other uses.
Presumably it's a commercial product, is it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Angie, do you want to say anything more about Strava?
No, I was under the impression from the County Council website that they were using Strava, so my apologies.
Well, Chris.
Andy, if you want to send me a link to where you've seen it, I'll quite happily look into it. But
it might be something else.
It could be being used by, for example, the local transport planners when they're looking at transport movements for utilitarian processes and so on, when they're looking at the transport boards for Gainsborough, Spalding and the larger market towns and Lincoln. It may be something that my roads colleagues are using, but it isn't something that we use in the Rights of Way team yet. But I'm not suggesting we might not do in the future, should it be worthwhile, but we do recognise that it is only walking and cycling.
I think it's always helpful if you can do that, Angie. It might be helpful because you might have discovered a kind of a left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing situation where people perhaps ought to be talking to Chris and they're not. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'll send Chris something afterwards.
Yeah. That I think then is just going to leave. Oh, anyone else got something they want to mention now on a future agenda? I say you can always table it later. In that case, we'll move on to the date and time of the next meeting.
Peter Hinton was indicating.
Oh, Peter Hinton, you were wanting to speak.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was half expecting the subject of the largest solar farm in the country in the south of the county to be on the agenda this afternoon. The reason I was dissuaded from requesting, because I can't remember it was Rob, but somebody told me that it was already on the agenda. I've reread the report that was filed with last meeting's minutes, and it's fine as far as it goes. But it's a huge tract of land, and there are two opportunities, one of which is specifically of interest to us, and that is the fact that the company planning it are now offering more permissive paths. So the discussion about permissive paths is fine, but there's also a lot of ecological changes to their submission as well. It's in the south of the county. It's stirring up great interest. There are huge banners by the NIMBY group. My real question, and for an agenda item, is who would police, with a small p, the actual actions by the development company to ensure that rights of way are protected, the permissive footways, bridle paths or whatever they are, being proposed on the ecological side, which is one of the reasons we all go into the country as well. But who will be monitoring that? Because it's a national project. It's not within the gift of the county council to approve or disapprove.
Chris Miller's going to reply to that in a moment, but the minutes actually I'm looking at now on this say that in response to the suggestion that the forum involve themselves as direct consultees, the deputy head of Environment added that the council sought to prepare an energy statement to which the local access forum's views would be taken on how access should be protected from when considering developments. Now, I think we took that as saying that, well, I don't mean to sound offensive, but I can't think of any other words at the moment. It sounds as if don't bother writing to us now. There will be a right time to write to us, and you will be informed when it is. It's a kind of, which is how I read that. Anyway, over to Chris Miller for what he has to say.
Thank you, Chairman. I think if I might, taking on Mr Hinton's example of the solar farm in South Kesteven, which will be one of the largest ones in the country until the next one in Lincolnshire is built. But we have a significant number of what are known as National Strategic Infrastructure Projects, or NSIPs for short, of which a number of them are for large solar farms such as the one discussed. My team, and that's just not just the rights of way team, but the sustainability and carbon management team, the natural environment team, and to a degree the floods and water management team, are all engaged in the county council's response, because, as Peter pointed out there, with these being national strategic infrastructure projects, it is the Secretary of State that makes the decision on the planning element of it, rather than the authority itself. So we only provide our input, and we will do that across all our services, highways included, and so on and so on. In terms of policing it, they are no more than any other landowner, and they can't obstruct public rights of way, and we would take enforcement action as appropriate. What you tend to find in the ones I've dealt with in the past, which some members may recall, Tritton Knoll, which is the onshore cabling from wind farm out in the North Sea all the way down to Bicker Fen, and also the Viking Link, which is similarly comes in at Sandylands, just south of Sutton-on-Sea, as a cabling route, is that we provide information about where the public rights of way are, and include those ones that are claimed through the definitive map modification order process, and we look for betterment where we can. So if that means that the routes are going to be affected, we look to seek for better routes, and more convenient routes for the public, and indeed extra access where we can find it. So we as the chairman mentioned earlier, sometimes we see these as opportunities as well as being a potential threat to the networks. But of course the networks are protected in statute, so they have to be accounted for, and we as the local highway authority remain the guardians of that.
Do you wish to respond to that? Or?
The only thing I would say, the last part of Chris's is probably the most important. It's definitely an opportunity. I'm taking part in a webinar next week on the subject, and as one tends to with planning applications, Section 106 style opportunities are something we should be looking at, and not just accepting that they may grant a permissive path somewhere, but what improvements could we make to the present network that crosses their land.
Is this the Ballard Pass project?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So Andy Savage, as our local area officer, has spent some time looking at all the routes there, and we have put together our submission to give to our colleagues in the development control section, and that will be reflected in the council's response.
Yeah, I have my personal thought on this, which is that I would think well worth pushing these developers on things like this, because for them it's an easy thing. There's no great difficulty in accommodating rights of way within these kinds of developments, and they're likely to see it as, well, we might as well win some friends here, because they'll have plenty of enemies. And it's not going to, it's not going to disrupt their whole plans by just making sure there's a clear route through them for the public footpaths.
Indeed, and of course we have to be reflective of the point that rights of way are not the only element that needs consideration. I mentioned the areas that I'm currently managing. Obviously, there's an effect on the natural environment. We also have to think about, and you'll have been in the news yesterday about food security, because a lot of these sites are being proposed on potentially viable agricultural land.
Yeah.
So our council response takes into account all of the various elements, and obviously there's a certain political angle to that as well.
Yeah.
Before we actually submit it.
I'll just add that the remarks I just made are wearing my rights of way hat, and I appreciate that I might be wearing other hats where I'd take a very different view on some of these things, and particularly the food security and loss of good agricultural land. That's a personal matter. I bring it back now to the question of our next meeting place and time. Well, we're always going to meet here unless we have a change of policy on that, if we want to. There's a question of when. Do you have some suggestions, Robert?
Well, so typically the council will go into a recess during August for meetings and member engagement activities. So possibly something mid to late September. Would that be agreeable, or would the forum prefer to wait a little longer?
Could I have some views from you, please, all of you, including those online? Should we leave it till late? Oh, Chris is wanting to say something.
How many meetings do we schedule a year? 3 or 4?
So, we've only got to do 2, haven't we?
As a minimum, yeah.
But we've already done that this year. But I didn't know if the forum wanted to.
I think we discussed it at the AGM, and I think we were looking at 3, but I could be wrong.
My recollection is that we used to have 4 before COVID, and my recollection is that we thought we'd have 3 for the time being. So perhaps if, what is it? It's now June. Perhaps early October might be better, but some better splitting the remainder of the year in 2, kind of thing. Unless anyone has any strong opinions the other way. So perhaps the first fortnight, somewhere in the first fortnight in October, first couple of weeks in October. Can we decide one now?
Oh, you want to decide now? Okay.
Well, we might as well, because people will be getting their diaries out now as we speak. I can see one who's doing it, literally.
There we go. So the room is engaged for the first week in October if we continue to meet Thursday afternoon. But the second week, so that would be the 13th PM, is available.
Any no dissenting voices in the room? I can't see the online view at the moment, so can you say? No. Well, okay, let's put it down for that then. Let's make a decision. And has anybody got any things they really want to bring up now? Otherwise, I'll be about to close the meeting. And thank you all for attending, and thank you for your contributions. I think there's been some quite interesting discussions. I had to learn 1 or 2 things. I hope Chris Miller has.
Always, Chairman.
In that case, I shall close the meeting. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone.